All right, well, the participant number has been holding steady about 85 for the past few seconds. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I think that anybody that rolls in, will just get some of the information on the tail end. We're also going to have a Q&A section at the very end that should recap everything that we talked about. So out of respect for your time, I'm going to go ahead and get started today. Before I get into the presentation, I'm just going to do a brief introduction about myself. My name is Paul Remmert. I'm the Associate Director of Financial Aid here at William & Mary. I'm joined in the background by Crystal Bowers, who is our customer service specialist. And if you've ever reached out to our office before, you've probably spoken with Crystal. So she's phenomenal. She's going to be working in the background, reading and moderating some of the question and answers that are coming up. And then at the very end, we'll do a summary of everything that we talked about. And if there are any questions that I was not able to address in the presentation, we can certainly go over those with you. For purposes of today and for most presentations, I try to keep the information as general as possible so that we're talking to as broad an audience as possible. There are times where students or families have very specific questions unique to their situation, and we can certainly help out with those kind of outside of the presentation forum. We have financial aid counselors available to kind of assist with those kind of special circumstances that would come up. So for purposes today, I'm going to keep it extremely general. And then if the nature of your question is something beyond the general nature as well, you're welcome to answer it. I just want to make sure that we're using the time to kind of touch on the things that would impact the most families. So that's a little bit about me. Like I said, I'm the Associate Director here at in Financial Aid. My background prior to this was in corporate finance. And what brought me to financial aid is a lot of the things that I saw in my corporate finance life were stemming from decisions that students had made academically back when they were in college. And it was important to me to try to kind of be an advocate for our students, help them with budgeting and help them not make some of the same mistakes that I saw on the other end of my profession. So I've been doing that for quite a while now, and it's been really gratifying in that sense. So that's a little bit about me. I'm going to jump into the presentation itself. Just want to go over kind of an overview on what we're going to be talking about today. So if you have a question that you thought might be specific to that and you hear that topic's coming up, you can certainly know that that's going to be addressed. We're going to talk about some of the things that our office oversees. There's some overlap between what students and families think that our office does and the Bursar office does. So I want to differentiate the two in the presentation. And it's my understanding after this presentation, you will be meeting with a representative from the Bursar office that will discuss the things that they oversee specifically as well. Like I said, we do have some overlap, and this is intended to kind of help clear up what each of our offices do. I'm also going to go over an overview of some general financial aid terms that we'll be using not only in this presentation, but you'll see on your financial aid letter or things when you stop by our office that you're going to discuss. So I want to make sure that those are relevant to you and understandable, kind of break things down in that regard. I'm going to go over some of the general financial aid sources that we have. Some you may be familiar with, you may not be. And if there are things that are interested with those, we'll go kind of do a deeper dive into those as well to be able to talk about how to pursue that funding. We're also going to give you some contact information at the very end. So if you do have questions, especially when it's related to finance, I typically see when we do presentations that people are hesitant to ask questions. It's such a personal topic. And we totally understand that. So there's some times where we'll do a presentation, there's not a lot of questions. And then privately after the session, we see a lot of people stop over and ask us kind of just for a more personal touch beyond, a general session. So I'll give you those that contact information if that's applicable to you. In the chat, I've posted some helpful links. So throughout the presentation, there's going to be some things that I reference and some links that I reference, and they're available for you to copy and paste there, save as a favorite, if it's something that's applicable to something that you'd be talking about. And then, like I said, at the very end, we're going to have an opportunity for you to ask questions. So anything that I didn't cover that you think would be relevant to the rest of the group that maybe I wasn't clear on, or that you would need some additional clarification on, we can certainly, I've reserved enough time in this presentation to allow that. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and jump into the presentation portion. So like I had said, I wanted to use this portion to kind of explain a little bit what our office oversees and what we do, how we're different from the Bursar office, and how some of the things that we do overlap. The primary responsibility of our office is to determine eligibility for need-based financial aid. And the way that we do that is through the use of the FAFSA application and the CSS profile. Both of those applications provide us with a lot of detail that kind of gives us the opportunity to determine the eligibility based on some of the metrics that are in those applications. So they're very helpful to us in ensuring that the limited funding that we have is being sent to the families that have shown the highest financial need. Another thing that our office does is, and some families aren't aware of this, there is an opportunity to appeal for financial aid eligibility. So a significant amount of time that we do is working with families who have had an unforeseen financial circumstance since filling out these applications. So essentially, if you fill out these applications and something unforeseen happens, such as a job loss or really, really high medical expenses, those are our two most common, you're not stuck with that financial aid offer for the entire year. We have the ability to work with you and make modifications to the FAFSA in our office to ensure that the FAFSA is getting as close a representation to the current financial situation as possible. So if you did not know that opportunity was available to you, and hopefully there isn't something unforeseen that has happened or will be happening, but just in the back of your mind, know that that's something that our office does do, and work closely with families so that you're not stuck in that situation for the duration of the year. Our office also confirms enrollment requirements to make sure that students remain eligible for the aid that they have been offered. So financial aid comes with some conditions for it, understandably, and sometimes that's academically and an array of many things that could impact financial aid, their enrollment, their GPA. So those are things that we monitor to make sure that students are just meeting those requirements so that we remain in compliance with the funding that we're overseeing. Some of our student population receive student loans, so our office will certify those loans, for the federal loans, private loans, Parent Plus loans. And when we say certify loans, that would be many of these are loans that the students are taking out for the first time or that the parents taking out on the behalf. And it's that extra check to ensure that the student is enrolled and it's fitting within the cost of attendance. The final, not the final thing that our office does, but for purposes of today, I wanted to advertise that our office provides budgeting guidance to students. I'd spoken earlier in my introduction about my background prior to coming and working in higher ed. And one of the most gratifying things that we can do in our office is to coach students financially on the funding that they've been given. It's general financial guidance. We don't get into anything like investing or things beyond school. But with the limited funding that they have here, this provides an opportunity for them to meet with our office to kind of essentially game plan the funding that they have been receiving. So not only is financial aid limited funding, but how can you maximize that funding that's been provided to ensure that it lasts the duration of the entire semester? And for many students, this is the first time that they're receiving any sort of funding in their name, even if they've worked before. It may have been a part-time job, but sometimes the funding can be rather large sometimes. And to be able to coach the students on, how to set a proper budget to ensure that those funds are sustained for the entire time that they're here is something that we really enjoy doing. I've included this link in the chat. It's also here. Our financial aid website offers a lot of very, very important information that you might have. We have essentially we've built that around some of the feedback of the family and students that we have discussed. So most things that we think might be relevant or important to you are probably exist on our financial aid website. So for a full overview of what our office can do and some of the services that we can offer, I encourage you to go to our financial aid website. So I want to give a brief overview, kind of a financial aid 101 to discuss, how we determine financial need and some of the components that are part of that. So you've probably heard the term cost of attendance. There's a common misunderstanding that means that's what William & Mary is going to charge you. In some cases, that's the case. There are some costs that we call direct costs that are billed and will be on your bill. And then there's indirect costs that are costs that you will probably have as a student, but aren't due to William and Mary. And we would be doing you a disservice if we didn't factor that into your cost of attendance as well. So I want to clarify that the cost of attendance is not what the cost is to attend William and Mary, although there are components of that that are comprised of that. But it's an overall estimate of what the overall cost that you might incur during your time as a student. First one I want to talk about is tuition and fees. That is going to be on everybody's bill. And for most students that are enrolled full-time, that's the same amount. So our students that are enrolled 12 hours or 18 hours will have the same full-time tuition and fees. When that changes is if a student gets approved for an underload, which is essentially approval for less than 12 hours, at which point that might change. But tuition and fees will always be on your bill as long as that you're enrolled here, whether you live on or off campus. The second portion that will appear on your bill when you're an on-campus student is room and board. So during the time that you're an on-campus student here, you will see tuition and fees, room and board on your bill. And those are what we classify as direct charges. So those three components are part of your cost of attendance. But the other half of your cost of attendance are for things called indirect charges. So those would be things that will not appear on your bill, but you'll likely have. So book expenses is one of them. We understand that you'll have transportation. And then we just have a miscellaneous kind of catch-all category called miscellaneous expenses. So just kind of for the little things that add up. This would be haircuts, a moderate expectation of entertainment budget, any clothing, things of that nature. And then we estimate those into there too. Again, I think we would be doing a disservice to families if we didn't include that in the cost of attendance. So I touched upon earlier on how to apply for financial aid. That would be through the FAFSA and the CSS profile. And again, that helps us to determine the eligibility. If you've not done so already, those links are available in the chat for you to have a direct link to filling out those applications. Once we get those applications, we determine financial need. So I also want to define what that means for us in our world, in the financial aid world. Because we'll constantly work with families that are saying, well, we need additional funding, but for purposes of today, we're defining what financial need is for in the world of financial aid and how we determine the eligibility. So essentially, financial need is determined with this formula. We take William and Mary's cost of attendance, which I had gone over briefly a few minutes ago. So we'll take that value. We'll subtract that from the expected family contribution. What the expected family contribution is that is a number that has been determined by the Department of Education from the application data that you submitted that essentially gives all schools an idea of what the family may be able to contribute. It's not always exact. I want to preface that we know that that's not exact, but what they'll do is they'll take the understanding of what reasonable expenses are in a certain area for cost of living, for housing, cost of living, for transportation, number in family, compare that to the family's income, compare that to their assets, and come up with something that they can determine as an expected family contribution. So we'll have our cost of attendance, we'll subtract the Department of Ed's expected family contribution, and then finally we'll subtract any scholarships or additional resources that a student is receiving, maybe from an outside organization, maybe employer tuition benefits. And if there's still a gap between those components when we subtract them from our cost of attendance, that remaining gap is what we define as financial need. So in our office, then we pool all of our resources that we have available and we say, how can we fulfill and fill that financial need? It's not always possible that we can do it. We don't have the funding to accommodate everyone's financial need. But when we use the term financial need, I just wanted to explain how we determine that. It's quite formulaic. So going back to what we were talking about with an appeal, our cost of attendance doesn't change. But if a family submits an appeal and says, hey, my mom or dad lost their job since they filled out the FAFSA, and we can confirm a loss of income, we can now change the FAFSA, which would reduce the expected family contribution from the Department of Ed. And now we've broadened that gap between the cost of attendance and those other components, and essentially expanded the financial need. And then we would re-examine our resources to see if we can additionally help with any additional funding to do that. So when we use the term financial need, I just wanted to make sure that we were clear on how we did that and how we use that information to determine financial aid eligibility. I want to talk a little bit more about outside scholarships and resources. Our students at William and Mary on average bring in about $7 or $8 million of resources, even outside of William and Mary. So these would be scholarship donors from national organizations, local organizations, parents' employer, things of that nature. And it really helps to reduce the amount of expenses that a student is going to have. But as being a recipient of those, the funding that our office provides is need-based aid. So we have to take into consideration all the resources that a student is receiving in addition to what the Department of Ed has said with the expected family contribution. And that's how that shows up in that formula from the last slide on where we need to account for these. So a question we commonly get is, well, how is this scholarship is this going to negatively impact my students' financial aid eligibility? Sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. If their full need has not been met and the amount of the scholarship is less than that, it should fit comfortably in there without any sort of interruption to their financial aid. The times where it does impact it is if we have fully filled in a student's financial need, and then we learn that there's an alternate resource, we do in some cases have to back out some of the financial aid that we've offered to make sure that A, doesn't exceed the cost of attendance, and to make sure that it also doesn't exceed the financial need from that formula that I showed you earlier. We're required by law to do that. It's federal law. So we do get in some discussions with families where they're upset about that policy, but we do everything in our power prior to having to reduce the aid to try to fit it in there. Without having to change the financial aid that somebody's already been awarded. So what we'll first do is, if there's any unmet need, it'll first go to fill that. If we then have to make a reduction, we'll reduce the federal work study that's been offered. And then we'll move on to student loans if the family has accepted that. And then after all those things have been exhausted, it's only that point that we go and we reduce the grant funding. So that's the last thing that we go to reduce when we have to do it, when there's an outside resource that exceeds a student's need or cost of attendance. You're encouraged to report those to our office. We're going to find out about it anyway when the donor sends the funding to the bursar office. We get a report the next day from the bursar office, which essentially lets us know an additional resource has been added to the student account. And then we go and make adjustments on the back end after it's paid out. There is a way for you to report those to us proactively so we can make proactive adjustments so that if there is possibly any negative impact, that we have told you with as much advance as possible about that. So you have as much time to plan and budget. And ideally, that should all occur prior to our financial aid paying out in the first place. So that way there's not funds that are being released and then retracted and then leaving a student with a balance. So although it's optional to report those to us, it's preferable and to your benefit that you do that. And that's through an outside scholarship resource form. I've attached that link in the chat. And again, that's just a proactive notification to us of the amount and duration of funding that you're going to be receiving. So in the event that we have to make any sort of changes, we can let you know as soon as possible so that there's no surprises after the financial aid is paid out. The other thing I want to discuss is loans. This is not going to be applicable to everyone. There's some financial aid offers that don't include loans. There's some that primarily include loans, and then there's some families that don't have to use those. So I would be remiss not to go over these because I do think that we, a significant portion of the questions that we get to our office are in relation to loans. So I want to spend a little time here just to make sure if these are of interest to you, that I've touched upon them, because there are several different kinds. And if you were unaware of the student loans, this should shed a little bit of light on what makes the characteristics of those different. The first one is the federal direct subsidized Stafford loan. That is a loan that while a student is in school is a 0% interest loan. There's also a 6-month grace period after graduation that 0% would also be honored. So essentially, if a family or student has to utilize that loan, it is 0% interest while the student is enrolled plus the additional 6 months after they graduate. So hypothetically, you could have a student that receives that loan, chips away at payments on it during the 4 years that they're at school, and by the end that they graduate and they've resolved that balance, no interest would have accrued. That's why it's considered a need-based loan, even though it's a loan. A non-need-based loan is the unsubsidized Stafford loan. It has certain characteristics of the subsidized Stafford loan. It is also a federal loan. And it does not require repayment while the student is in school, just like the subsidized Stafford loan. I'm not sure I mentioned that. The subsidized and the unsubsidized loan will not require repayment while the student is in school. And the interest will not accrue on a subsidized. Although you don't have to make a payment on an unsubsidized Stafford loan, the interest does accrue while a student is at school. So when I was a student, I would pay the interest that accrued so that it didn't continue to snowball. But I was not required to do that. That was just something I did optionally, just so there was not a snowball effect on the compounding interest. The next loan that families typically take after those have been exhausted is the Federal Direct Parent Plus loan. This is a loan, not a student loan, and it's one that the parent would take out on behalf of the student. What differentiates this is it is credit-based. So there could be a situation where family could be denied for that, just like they would a typical loan. And that one would require repayment while the student is enrolled. The understanding is that families have shown an ability to make a payment, unlike a student that may not be working while they're a student. I've posted the interest rates from the federal site down below if that's of any interest to you all. Families use a Parent Plus loan for a lot of things. For some families, they rely on that to close the gap between what we've offered and what the cost of attendance is. We'll also have some families that, as an investment strategy, have saved for college and have that, but they feel that they're doing better with their investments than what the 8% loan is. So we'll actually have some families that are able to pay for college that take out the Parent Plus loan so that they don't have to tap as aggressively into their savings to pay. And while their investments continue to accrue. So over the course of working with families throughout the years, I've heard different strategies of how they use that. And I just want to clarify and point those out. Next, what we do is there's either private student loans or there's a private parent loan. You're welcome to pursue those in lieu of the federal loans. In most cases, the federal loans are going to be more competitive than a bank loan. That's not always the case. And there's some families that have relationships with credit unions that they may be able to shop around and find a better rate. But with the student and parent loan, it is also credit-based. And the student loan will require a cosigner. One of the benefits of the federal loan for the student is it's not credit-based. It's based off of their enrollment. So they will be approved for it no matter what. There are limits to those. And above those limits is when you pursue some of these other loans. We have more information about loans on our website. I know I was quite wordy on all of these things. So if you're feverishly writing stuff down, I do encourage you to visit our website where we attach a bunch of links and a bunch of different information. So if you need to read that and kind of digest all that information that I provided to you, it's certainly out on our site. Student employment is something I want to talk about too. In our world for financial aid, we refer to that as work study. But on a broader sense, we refer to student employment as a student working on campus. In some cases, that is funded through financial aid through the work study program. But we do have students that aren't eligible for work study funding, but they're certainly allowed to work on our college campus if they find a department that wants to hire them. What differentiates the two, the experience for the student is actually the same. They're getting a biweekly paycheck from essentially from an employer every 2 weeks. On the back end, a work study student is funded with federal funding. So it is a benefit to the department to hire a work study student because it's not coming at a cost to the department. So the benefit of being a work study student is it may make them a more desirable candidate to the department that is hiring them because it's at no cost to the department. But we have some amazing students that may not be eligible for a work study, and the department says, this person is just going to be so important to our operations. We're going to go ahead and hire them through our own wages as a student and employee. So I wanted to differentiate the two, but the experience for the student is going to be exactly the same. It's essentially a part-time job on campus. The pay is no less than federal minimum wage, but that could differ depending on the department that hires. They could have their own set of funding that they can do. So as far as where to find a job, we don't do job placement in the financial aid office. We just confirm eligibility for the students. But there's the Tribe Career website, which should be the aggregate site for departments to post all of their open positions. We encourage the departments to do that. That way students aren't having to knock on every door of every department or every office on campus to see if they're hiring. So most do that, and that's a great place to start looking. There are department websites and flyers around campus if a department opts to do that, either in addition to the Tribe Career site or just to post on their windows. So that is certainly available too. Sometimes word of mouth as well. You may have a student that's familiar with a friend that works in that department and may be able to find it out that way. And then once or twice a semester, there's a campus student employment fair. Those aren't something that our office oversees, so I'm not familiar with the upcoming dates, but those will be posted on our William and Mary website when those are made available. A few important things to remember that don't fit into those other slides, but I would be remiss not to bring up is students are required to reapply for financial aid eligibility every year. And I want to reiterate that eligibility is not guaranteed each year. I want to provide some clarification to that statement. Our philosophy, how we provide financial aid, doesn't change year to year. So when we say eligibility is not guaranteed each year, that would not be a situation where a family has received a generous aid package their freshman year, and then we just yank the funding the sophomore year as kind of like, well, bait and switch, we got you here, and now you're stuck. So when we say it's not guaranteed, it doesn't mean that. We'll have students that have this very, very similar aid offer all 4 years that they're here. We'll have some students that had an aid offer that was less and is actually more the next year, because remember, you're reapplying on that FAFSA application each year. It's going to be reflective of changes to your income and changes to your assets and changes to your household. And so the students that you hear have fluctuation to their aid offer, it's because there's been fluctuations to their application. But I want to reaffirm for you all that we're not changing our philosophy on how we provide financial aid. The change in financial aid would only be because of a change in the application. So I wanted to make sure that that was absolutely clear. Sometimes our office ends up on some family chat boards where they'll say, well, William and Mary, removed our funding the second year, but they leave out the part where the income for the family had also increased by $75,000 for that year. And that's the reason that would have impacted the aid. So our philosophy, again, does not change while a student is here. The things that would change the eligibility would be the data points that are entered on those applications. So again, even though it's not guaranteed, many of our students have exactly the same offer, as long as the information on the applications has not varied that much. And like I said, it often goes up as well if that application shows lower income. So the fact that it's not always guaranteed is not always detrimental to the student. It can actually be beneficial. And then going back to what I said before, we can also, through an appeal, change the eligibility in a positive way if we can confirm that something unforeseen has happened. Secondly, additional documentation may be requested by our office. There are some students that the applications themselves warranted the determination of eligibility without anything else. And there's some times where there may be information that is discrepant between the two applications, that was not filled out correctly, that it wasn't clear. And so there's certain things that we look for that are like, I'm not sure that we can provide an aid offer without that being provided. So in the event that that's the case, we'll post the requirement on the student's account. And then every so often, maybe once a week, once every 2 weeks, we send out what's called a tracking letter to remind students. It's a proactive notification from our office to say, here's the things that are still needed before we can provide you with a financial aid offer. There's not deadlines to submit that paperwork, but we encourage families to submit them as soon as possible. It won't make you ineligible for aid if you submit those things later, but it does delay our opportunity to provide you with a financial aid offer in a timely way. So it would be unfortunate for the academic year to begin without knowing what your eligibility is, and then have to provide a financial aid offer on the back end just because the paperwork was provided later. So it's in your best interest to provide it as soon as possible. We do everything that we can to try to have everything processed within about 7 to 10 business days of it being submitted to our office. And then if additional clarification is needed, we'll reach back out to the student. Also, for future years, we provide the aid notifications a little later than you're used to. So for incoming families, we provide them as early as possible as you're making decisions on where the student is going to attend. This is true of all colleges. But at that time that we send those aid offers out, we're not sure what our cost of attendance is. It's not finalized for the upcoming year. So we use the current financial aid cost of attendance, provide the initial financial aid offer, and then when the cost of attendance is confirmed, we redetermine the eligibility for financial aid now that there's a larger cost of attendance in most cases. But what we'll do for continuing students is once a student is already enrolled here, we will wait for that cost of attendance to be determined. So if you were a family that had in the first year received a financial aid offer in February, and here it is mid-June and you still haven't seen a financial aid offer for a continuing student, we actually don't provide the aid offers for continuing students until about mid to late June. So it wouldn't mean that anything's wrong with your application. It just means we're waiting for the finalized cost of attendance so that we're making as few revisions as possible to your financial aid. I wanted to provide some contact information. I also did provide this in the link chat. So if you need to refer to that, it's there as well. The general email to our office is finaid@wm.edu. For most inquiries, that's going to be the best place for you to start for two reasons. Most of the information that our office provides is going to be general information anyway, and we'll be able to answer that on the customer service side of things. And should it require the attention of a specific undergrad counselor, we can triage that to them from that account so that you're not having to remember what's my counselor's email address, what's the front counter's email address. It's kind of a nice place for you to start, and then we can filter it and disseminate it internally from that point. With that said, on our website, there are direct points of contact, and there are certain counselors assigned to certain last name alphas. So your student, if they would ever want to meet with a financial aid counselor specifically, would have the option to reach out to them directly. And then secondly, our phone number is listed there as well. Same as the email. That's the best place to kind of call to get your general questions answered. And should it require a more specific review from your financial aid counselor, it would either be forwarded it to them or you can reach out to them directly. But again, we want to ensure that our undergrad counselors are doing everything that they can do to process paperwork as fast as possible, or to make sure that those times are reserved for working with a family that might be appealing versus general questions like, how do I fill out a FAFSA? Those would be best to come through our main line. With that said, I want to let you know that we're a very small office. I think some families tend to think that we have a robust call center and a team of customer service people working in the background. And although our office does assist with customer service, we do have one person right now assigned directly to customer service support. So if you reach out, and that's Crystal, she's here in the background, but if you email our account, you've probably received a response, and that was probably from Crystal. If you've called our office, you've probably received a response from Crystal. And some of the messages that are left are students saying, I've called one or two times and I've not heard back yet. It's because she's on the other phone. It doesn't kick out to somebody else. And again, we don't have a call center. We do our very, very best, even during peak times, to try to get your inquiry answered as soon as possible. Our goal within the office is within about 2 or 3 business days. On most days, it's much earlier than that. In most cases, same day. But I just want to give the expectation that, especially during peak times and due to volume combined with our short staff, that your question may take about 2 or 3 business days for response. And in most cases, it shouldn't require an emergency inquiry anyway. We've done a lot of proactive notifications. We've sent a lot of things out, and we try to make sure that the questions that come in are not something that needs an immediate resolution to without the ability to do it within that 2 or 3 business day window. If you have not done so already or heard of this, a passphrase will be required for you when you contact our office. So a passphrase is a verification system that verifies the identity of who's calling. Obviously, through phone or email, we can't confirm the identity like we could with a student showing a driver's license to our office in person. The student's account is their account. And even if a parent is paying the bill, for the privacy of the student's records, we cannot disclose anything without the student have given written authorization to our office to do that. So we're not able to provide any educational records, balance information, financial aid information without the consent from the student. My daughter's going to be in college in 2 years. So I can guarantee you that even though it's her account and I'll be paying the bill, she's going to be strongly encouraged to give me the access to do so. So that's a conversation that you're going to want to have with the student. If for any reason they're reluctant to provide it, that if you are going to be paying for their school, it's in their best interest that you do that so that we can provide, the customer service full answer that we could do. Otherwise, we have to give general information that would not be specific to a student's account. I've provided a link to passphrase in there. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail on how to set it up, since that link will walk you through that. But I just wanted to let you know that if you contact our office and you say, well, when is my son's can you tell me how much my son received in financial aid funding? We would not be able to disclose that. And the subsequent questions, I was like, well, I'm the one paying the bill. I need to know it. They would still have to disclose that. We could give general information like saying financial aid in general is set to disperse on the first day of class, but we could not give specific amounts. We can't confirm where a student is taking classes. What class at what time could be information that could be used inappropriately by somebody that the student doesn't want to know. So if we ask for a passphrase, it's not to make the process harder for you. It's just out of an abundance of respect to the student's privacy and to the records, which in turn also include your very personal financial information as well. You wouldn't want somebody just calling up posing to be the parent of a student and us disclosing your income and your asset information too. So I want to be forthright that I know that that's a barrier when you're reaching out for help, that we're not able to provide it, but it is out of abundance of care for the privacy and the information that's shared with our office. So that's all of the general information that I'm going to go over. Like I said, the Bursar office is going to go into more detail about billing and the role that they play in that. Our financial aid obviously impacts the bill, but we don't oversee billing and we don't oversee refunds. And Alan, who's going to be presenting to you, is going to fill in all those gaps of those types of questions, since it just doesn't fall under our scope of responsibility. Crystal has been writing and typing in the background, and I see that there's a queue for the Q&A. So I'm gonna ask her what kind of questions have we been receiving that I can answer, Crystal.
Yeah, so I've answered a couple of those, and there are some that are a little more specific. So I'd encourage you all to reach out to our office by email or phone. But some of the general questions are the aid packages that students currently have final.
If you are an incoming student, they are not. And so when we provided the initial aid offer with using last year's cost of attendance, it is as accurate as information as we could provide at the time. So the discussion among all schools, not just ours, is it's not in our best interest to wait until June to send that to families, because that they've missed the window on being able to find out the financial aid that they can receive. So what we do then at that point is obviously cost of attendance can progressively go up annually, and we're aware of that. We just don't know what that would be when those go out. So now that we have our confirmed cost of attendance, just confirmed last week, we will be sending revised aid notices that not only reflect the new cost of attendance, but if you were eligible for need-based aid, if the costs increase, that is now brought in that gap of need even more. And we will go back and we'll provide a revised aid offer to take into consideration the fact that there is now a larger cost of attendance than when we had initially done it. Again, our intention is not to provide an aid offer and then radically change it and throw off your entire budget. What I will say is that there's a small, about a week lag time between the cost of attendance being updated and the student seeing a revision on their aid. So we've had some students, even just in the past few days, that have logged into their account and they say, I saw my costs go up, but my financial aid hasn't changed at all. We have to do the second part on the back end manually, and we're in that middle of that process right now. So if you've received an aid offer already, you will likely see a revised one that will be forthcoming that either shows the change of the cost of attendance or the change in eligibility, or a combination of both.
Another question was about work study. If students can start looking for jobs over the summer, or when that can be accepted. I think that will also tie into a question about loans. When can the loan process, when can that be accepted, as well as parent loans as well?
So departments are making plans for themselves just like we are. So they want to know what their staffing capabilities are going to be for the upcoming year as well, so that they can do their planning. When they're available to post the site, I would refer you back to the 3 areas where they're going to be posting the site when they start to doing that. It is closer to the start of the fall, and I apologize if that's vague, but part of that is dependent on when the department ultimately posts those positions. So be sure to keep an eye out for that. I know that that's vague, but that's really the best place to do it. Now, keep in mind, there are more students eligible for a work study position than there is funding to accommodate. So just as in any professional setting, students will be interviewing. The students will be competing with other schools that are students that have work study funding. So as soon as that is posted on their site, it's in your best interest to go ahead and apply for those. The other thing I want to mention about work study that I didn't put in the slide, it's a bit of a side note, but if a student can pursue a job that is in their something of interest to them that they're pursuing professionally, so a student that's going to be a business major might want to start looking in the College of Business for a job. The reason that would be the case is you may have a situation where a student is a work study in the department of where they're getting their major, and then they graduate with 4 years of experience in a department of their major, combined with the fact that they can get letters of recommendation and things of that sort. So it's not always possible, but I encourage students to start their journey there, so they're at least doing something in a field that they're interested in. Alternately, we've had some students that have worked in a department and then realized that that's not what they really wanted their focus of study to be. So they've determined that in their first year before they're able to declare a major, versus now sinking 2 or 3 years into a major and then realizing that it's not something that they want to do. So I know that's a bit of a tangent on that question, but it's something that I meant to mention on the work study portion of my presentation, that if they can start there to look there, that would be ideal. Oh, there was a second part to that question with the loans. Now, we're just about to open up the eligibility to accept the loans as well. We withheld that for the same reason. We didn't want a family to accept a loan, find out the cost of attendance was a little bit higher, and now they might be eligible for a little bit more in loan funding, and then have to, go through the process of a revision with that. So really, the initial loan offer was just to give you a heads up of what you're likely going to see for your eligibility of the loan, and the opportunity to start that typically starts mid to late June. I think we're on schedule to be a little bit before that this year, but we're not behind on that, and neither are you, as far as something you missed that you should have done at this point. We'll send a notification when that's opened up too. Anything else, Crystal?
Yeah, again, some of the other questions are a little more specific, if we have got time to go into a couple of those, or.
Yeah, we got a few minutes.
Okay. Can families challenge the Department of Ed's calculation on expected family contributions?
You would do that not with them, but through us with an appeal. What they've done is they've provided us guidance on the things that we can make changes to. But as far as challenging the methodology, that unfortunately wouldn't be through William and Mary. So if we can't determine that there's something that's been unforeseen that's occurred, or a change in the data elements, that number is pretty set in stone as far as that's concerned. Like I said, my daughter in 2 years will be going to college. I have no doubt the expected family contribution that they will determine for us is not going to be 100% reflective of the exact bills that I have here as well. But keep in mind, we'll have families that we'll work with families that make significant income, but if they have discretionary spending and discretionary expenses, so they have a bigger house and nicer cars and a lot of credit card debt, we could have families that make significant income that are still, in their world, might still be paycheck to paycheck in that regard, because they have so many expenses, because they have a larger house and they have nicer cars. When then they get an expected family contribution, they say there's no way that we can do that. But the aid that we have is so limited that we have to ensure that it's some of those data points that they're using in their methodology. They'll use what is reasonable expenses for those things. That is not an accurate reflection of what somebody's exact expenses are.
Another question was, how are the new FAFSA changes impacting how aid will be given?
That's a great question. So everything specific to what I've provided this year is in regards to how things are being done this year. So if there are some of you that haven't done a FAFSA, I needed to keep that information relevant because it is current for this year. The upcoming FAFSA changes on the user end are absolutely going to simplify the process for a lot of families to do it. In fact, they've called it a FAFSA simplification. On the back end of things, and this is for all schools right now, is it's eliminating a lot of those key data points that were very beneficial for us to know. And then so it may skew how we determine the eligibility from the standpoint that we're losing key data points that are there. So one of the things that has been discussed, it's not confirmed yet, but through the CSS profile, typically we only had families do that one time at the beginning and then just do the FAFSA every year. The CSS profile still keeps a lot of those data points that are extremely helpful to us when we provide our institutional aid. So for example, we've had a lot of families that are really upset that they're removing the number in college component, because on the current way the FAFSA does things, they will say if a family makes X number of dollars, but there are 2 in college, they will divide that expected family contribution with the understanding that it is now going to support 2 in college. The number in college question is going away on the FAFSA next year. So that's caused a lot of panic for our families who are saying, well, wait a second, if I have 2 or 3 in college and that question's going away, is that still going to be considered? We can still, through the CSS profile, ask the number in college question and include that in our methodology on how we would determine our institutional aid. And we do have reports that show a year-to-year comparison of a family's financial aid. So we're making every effort that we can that if a family would have received a different aid offer just because the application changed, that we're going to do everything that we can to try to get as close as possible to that so that you all don't feel the impact of the aid of the application changing as much with those key elements being taken out. There will be a lot of guidance with that on our website on how to apply for next year. And that will all be forthcoming. And in fact, a lot of it's still being figured out, not just with our school, but across the nation. In fact, they're delaying when they can even roll out the FAFSA because it's not even going to be ready until December when it's traditionally there in October. So it's not a situation that's unique to William and Mary or William and Mary families. We've gone to a lot of conferences the past few months where, schools are also, strategizing how they're going to have that and have that impacted. So keep an eye out on our website and for any forthcoming correspondence that we're going to have on how to apply for next year.
Another question is which is weighted more heavily in computing EFC assets or income?
For sure, income, but that could also be dependent on the situation. So we could have a family that may not have a lot of income because the parents have retired at that point, but have significant assets, at which point, even though the income is low, they still may not qualify for a lot of financial aid if they've shown that there's significant assets that are available to still be able to help. The general answer to that would be primarily the income is one of the larger deciding factors. But we'll often get questions like this, and it's hard to pinpoint. If families will say, well, what amount do I need to make in order to get the maximum amount of financial aid? An example I always give is you could have 2 families that have the exact same income and assets, and family 1 has 2 in the household and 1 in college, and family 2 has 8 in the household and 4 in college. They're going to have radically different financial aid offers, even though the income and the assets are exactly the same. That's because the income and assets that were reported have to support a larger number of family members in the example I gave you in family number 2 than family number 1. So families will, put a lot of onus on the income and asset portion, which it is extremely important, but then there's a lot of other data sets that are looked at as well. Something like this would also be a family that's closer to retirement. The assets will be taken in consideration less heavily than parents that might be in their mid-40s and 20 years away from retirement at that point. So even within the assets that are reported, those type of metrics, or what are the age of the parent, that's all looked at. The Department of Ed will look at things like saying a family living in New York City is going to have a higher cost of living than a family that lives in rural Idaho. And so even they could have the exact same income and assets, but because the cost of living in those two are there, the expectation of reasonable expenses in both of those regions will provide a different aid offer in that scenario too. So it's primarily income and asset driven, along with all of the other data points there that help to formulate that. The Department of Ed has given a breakdown on their website on that methodology. So if you have any sort of interest in seeing how exactly they determine that, you would want to go to their site for that. It will provide all the nuanced parts of the question that families typically have on that. We're on the receiving end of it and have a conversational understanding of it, but there is a whole very, very specific breakdown on how they determine that, which will change obviously with the new application. But for now, that's the current guidance. I think we got time for maybe one more.
Okay, yeah, and this is actually a couple of questions I'm going to grab from both of these. One part of that is, can you start repaying the subsidized loan while in school, and will that void the interest deferment? And then another loan question, are the prepayment penalties for the direct unsubsidized loan, are they fixed rates over the life of the loan? What's the term?
Yep, no penalty for prepaying. And I know that from experience because that's what I did when I was a student. So if you start the repayment on it, you're not going to void the opportunity on the subsidized for the 0% interest. You're just chipping away at the principal balance. And we'll work with students that, if they're here for 8 semesters, they're receiving 8 semesters of aid, and they took out X number of loans, how much would they hypothetically have to pay per month to chip away to make sure that it's paid off before it starts accruing interest? So we'll have those conversations with students so it doesn't trigger any sort of interest accrual on there. As far as the interest rate for the unsubsidized is fixed. And so that would be the amount for over the life of the loan. So that wouldn't change either. There's a lot of loan information on our website, almost to the point where it's probably too much information, but for specifics like that, if it's not on our site, it will link you to the federal site on information about that too. So definitely check that out. It's definitely worth seeing. I'm going to leave you all with this. When I was a student, I was really intimidated to stop by my financial aid office. So I think there were missed opportunities that I had and missed conversations that I could have had that probably would have benefited me as a student. It's ironic that I've ended up in this as a career. But we have an open door policy here in our office. We're a small staff, but everybody that's here is working because this is where their hearts were telling them to be and to want to help students through this. If there is an intimidation about stopping by our office, I want to dispel those. We've seen every scenario. We've talked with every sort of situation that we can think of. There's probably nothing new that we wouldn't have already discussed in a multiple of that. I know that finances are a very touchy subject for students and families. It's a very personal thing to talk about as well. And so one of the things I truly encourage with my staff is just to take that into consideration when they're talking with a family. So should you have a situation that's unfortunate and a change of the information that you have to appeal, or you're asking for money and you're not able to pay a bill, reach out to our office with the understanding that there is no judgment at all on prior financial decisions or anything that you're bringing to our table. I just want to make sure that we're not missing that opportunity to have a conversation with you over the fact that you were just nervous to disclose what the situation was. So I hope that this information has been helpful. I hope that it's general, but if the only takeaway is that we have an open door policy for you all to stop by with these questions, then I think that's a success in that regard, and a nice way to spend our hour. So with that said, just to make sure that I don't interfere with Alan's presentation coming up at 1, I just wanted to thank you for the time here. It's always weird to do these over Zoom because I'm not physically seeing anybody. But I hope that some of the information that I provided has resonated with you all and cleared a lot of things up for you. And then we're here if there's anything else that you need. So thank you for stopping by. I truly appreciate it.